We've all wondered about it, haven't we? This connection, or maybe disconnection, between our physical selves and our mental lives. Thoughts, feelings, the brain. How does it all link up?
It's a fundamental question, for sure. And today, we're looking back at an early attempt to map this very territory.
That's right. We're diving into a work called Physiological Psychology by James Gibson Hume. It was actually published way back in 1892.
And interestingly, it started as an address he gave to the Ontario Teachers Association.
Oh, for teachers. That's interesting. Suggests it wasn't just abstract theory. So what was the big question Hume was wrestling with?
Well, he was trying to define what this emerging field of physiological psychology actually was. How did it relate to physiology, the study of the body in psychology, which he saw as the study of consciousness?
So kind of carving out its space.
Exactly. He called it a disputed territory, claimed by both sides, the body people and the mind people.
Okay. And he made a distinction, didn't he, between physiological psychology and something else. Psychological physiology. They sound almost the same.
Yeah, they do. But the difference is key to his thinking. Psychological physiology, for Hume, was when physiologists used mental stuff reactions, feelings, as clues to understand the nervous system better.
So using the mind to figure out the body's wiring, like maybe testing reflexes?
Precisely. The main goal is understanding the physical system. The mind is just a tool in that process.
Got it. So physiological psychology is the other way around.
You got it. That's psychology, the study of consciousness, trying to borrow the methods of physiology, the scientific experimental methods to investigate our inner states.
So psychology trying to be more, scientific about the mind itself.
That's the idea. And for Hume, psychology's core subject was always states of consciousness, our inner world, our subjective experiences.
And the main tool for looking at that inner world was introspection, looking within.
Yes, introspection. But he acknowledged it wasn't straightforward. He even brings up criticisms from a Dr. Maudsley.
Right, Maudsley had objections. What were they?
Well, Maudsley argued first that not many people are actually capable of reliable introspection. Second, even those who try often disagree on what they find.
Okay, fair enough. And the third?
The third is a bit of a paradox. How can you observe your own mental activity without stopping it? And if you stop it, what's left to observe?
That's a tricky one. Did Hume have an answer for that?
He did, and it's pretty intuitive. He used the example of a toothache.
A toothache, okay.
Well, you know you have a toothache while you're having it.
Right.
You don't need to stop the pain to be aware of the pain.
Okay. That makes sense. You're aware of the state as it's happening.
Exactly. So we can be aware of conscious states without necessarily halting them for inspection. But Hume definitely agreed introspection isn't easy. It takes development.
Development? How so?
He suggested we start by focusing outward, then we become aware of our inner states, and finally we realize we are the ones having these states self-consciousness. It's a process.
Okay. But introspection wasn't the only way, according to Hume. He thought we needed objective study too.
Yes, very much so. He agreed with Herbert Spencer on this. Subjective looking within needs to be balanced by objective looking without.
And what did that objective study look like for Hume?
All sorts of things, really. Observing people's conduct, language, studying literature, art, institutions, history, customs, even looking at the development of infants or animal behavior, referencing people like Darwin and Romanes.
So looking at the outward expressions of inner states?
Pretty much. And this naturally leads to what he called the debatable common ground between biology and psychology, the nervous system, the brain.
Right, studying the physical basis. He mentioned comparative studies.
Yeah, comparing brain development across species. And he touched on some early, frankly, flawed stuff, comparing brain weights between men and women.
Flawed how?
Initially, just looking at absolute weight seemed to favor men. But Hume pointed out the correction. You need to look at brain weight relative to body weight.
Proportionally.
Exactly. And proportionally, he notes, the average actually favored women at the time. Though he also mentions another controversial view from Lombroso about men having finer nervous systems. It was messy early science.
Yeah, sounds like it. What about direct experiments on the brain?
He discussed findings from animal experiments, vivisection, things like the frog's heart continuing to beat, reflex actions purely from the spinal cord. What happens if you remove the frog's cerebrum? Basic functions.
And this led to ideas about different brain parts doing different things. Localization.
Yes. He mentions Gall phrenology bumps on the head, which was largely discredited, but then Broca's discovery of a specific speech center in the brain. That was huge.
A specific area linked to a specific function.
Right. And later experiments like Fritz and Hitzig using electrical stimulation to find motor areas, and others trying to map sensory functions or even memory, though there was debate, like Gold arguing damage caused more general impairment.
So a lot of early mapping attempts. What about trying to measure mental experiences more directly? Psychophysics.
Yeah, psychophysics was this attempt to bring mathematical precision to psychology, measuring subjective states via objective changes. Like, how much heavier does a weight need to be before you notice the difference, the threshold of sensation?
Trying to quantify the subjective.
Exactly. And reaction time experiments were big too, using a chronoscope to measure how long it takes to respond to a signal.
Stimulus, brain processes it, response.
Right. And Hume highlighted something interesting. Reaction time varied depending on whether you focused your attention on receiving the signal or on making the response.
Oh, why the difference?
He linked it to physiological readiness, muscle tension, breathing, and also just habitual focus.
Yeah.
Plus things like distraction, fatigue, practice, they all affected reaction times.
Okay, so they were finding ways to measure mental processes. But Hume had reservations, didn't he, about this purely physiological approach?
He did. He felt that while these scientific methods were valuable, they often gave a limited or partial view. They focused on the changes in consciousness, but maybe missed the consciousness itself, the unifying activity.
What do you mean by unifying activity?
Well, think about memory or recognition. Hume used an analogy. A watch hand moves, but the watch doesn't remember its past positions. Consciousness does. Recognizing something requires a link between the present perception and a past one.
So there's a continuity, a self that connects experiences over time.
That's what he argued. He said this unity of consciousness is different from just a collection of brain cells, which are more like an aggregate of separate things. Consciousness integrates.
I see. So he was worried that focusing only on the physical bits might make us forget the unique nature of conscious experience.
Exactly. He noted analogies between nerve processes and mental ones, like association of ideas, but worried that the materialistic bias of physiological psychology could overlook what's distinctive about mental life.
And he felt the old psychology, the introspective kind, had actually set the stage.
Yeah, he argued it provided the basic classifications and questions that the new physiological psychology was investigating. He pushed back against the idea that only the new science taught us about habit, for example. He argued introspection reveals habit too, but perhaps in a richer way as something acquired, possessed, and controllable, not just an unconscious mechanism, which was kind of the simplistic physiological view he was critiquing.
Interesting. And this led to concerns about morality.
Definitely. Hume worried that if you reduce everything to physiology, to materialism, then wrongdoing becomes just a kind of unavoidable disease.
Yeah.
Where's free will? Where's responsibility? Moral distinctions seem to evaporate.
That's a serious implication.
It is. He argued against the purely materialistic hypothesis, saying, look, we never actually observe brain secreting thought. That's an inference, a hypothesis. And he felt it ultimately leads to agnosticism, saying we can't really know reality.
But he thought we do know something.
Yes, ourselves. Self-consciousness, the knower, he argued, is more fundamental, more directly known than the material world we perceive. And our moral experiences are facts of consciousness that materialism struggles to account for.
So, while embracing the science, he wanted to keep philosophy in the picture. Did he see any practical applications, especially for those teachers he was speaking to?
He did suggest that findings, like brain localization, could inform education. Understanding individual differences, are you more of a visual learner or an auditory learner, could change how we teach things like spelling.
Tailoring methods to how people's brains seem to work.
Right. He even floated an idea for spelling reform using a phonetic alphabet alongside traditional spelling. But he also cautioned against seeing physiological psychology as revealing the organic unity of the mind. He thought general psychology always knew that, and focusing too much on brain parts could actually obscure the whole.
So integrate the science, but don't let it overshadow the bigger picture of the conscious person.
That's the core message. He really advocated for scientific studies, especially physiological psychology, to be grounded in philosophy for a deeper understanding of consciousness, morality, and the limits of purely physical explanations. He worried about too much specialization, especially for teachers.
A call for broader thinking. So wrapping up, Hume in 1892 was really navigating this tension. how to study the mind scientifically, using the body as a window without losing sight of what makes consciousness unique.
Precisely. He saw the value in the new methods but warned against reducing the mind to the brain. And for you listening, understanding this historical perspective really shows how long we've been grappling with the mind-body problem, and Hume laid down some fundamental points still relevant today.
It certainly does. It leaves us with a big question, really. Considering Hume's arguments from over a century ago, where do you see the biggest potentials and maybe the biggest dangers in how we study the mind and behavior now? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Finding that balance between the objective and the subjective is still the challenge.
Thanks for digging into this fascinating piece of history with us.